you're failing to honor human life up to the point that you would want to. So logically, it's always seemed like a contradiction to me. But the practical reality is that in most societies, there are serious challenges, and that things happen, and that people have to step up to doing what they have to do, and sometimes they have to lay their lives on the line for others. Sometimes people have to take on dependents that they didn't ask to. Sometimes when people inherit money from a family, it didn't happen to me, but sometimes what comes with it is raising a sibling's child, or raising grandchildren or something. Sometimes that happens in other families. So just whether you have children isn't the only thing that determines whether you should have to be responsible for a dependent. And that's another thing that's kind of missing from the way we debate these things. We always debate it in terms of getting rid of teen pregnancy, which we should, and not having children until you're ready to have them, which we should. But a lot of times people don't really have a practical choice. And the same thing with elder care. I didn't really have a practical choice in it as far as providing for my mother, and that became quite significant in the last few years, even though she was well off. It might have turned out a lot worse than it did. One of the things, though, that has happened in the past few years with the blogging is that I find that as I become more visible, again, with the blogs and with the social media and so forth, and Twitter and Facebook and so forth, people start expecting things from you. People start approaching you to do things for them, and sometimes it's people who would become dependent. Sometimes people behave in a way that's disturbing. They'll say something to me that would ordinarily be seen as foolish, making a fool of yourself, in order to make a fool of me for being more privileged than they are. And this can be very dangerous. There was a case on Facebook recently, and by the way, that person has unfriended me since then, where a person kept on asking me if I was going to provide him with a career or provide him with an opportunity, and I didn't know how in the world was I going to do that? What was I going to do? Bring him into the country illegal? It was so vague. He seemed to be trying to abase himself in order to abase me. When you see that kind of behavior in social media, or when people approach you that way, that's a time you should be careful and realize you could be attracting danger. And all of this is tied together. What happened in the 2016 election was very much the politics of resentment. You had a whole electorate that was resented the elitism, the intellectual elitism of not the far left, but sort of the central, almost classical liberal, not exactly left, but the classical liberal center of places like CNN and Vox Media and the major news broadcasts, not the conservative ones, but the major ones, NBC and ABC. They're all sort of centrist and somewhat liberal, and somewhat politically correct, very good on gay rights, very good on race, but not going too far into identity politics. What happened is that the people that have been, what happens is a lot of people feel marginalized. They feel like they become insignificant and that they don't matter personally, and so they'll start behaving badly and making themselves look foolish when they approach people because they want to make a point that you're not really any better than they are. This is dangerous, and I think this kind of thing affected the election. I think it's something that maybe the Russians picked up on, that maybe Vladimir Putin picked up on, and trying to manipulate the electorate to just throw a Molotov cocktail, as Michael Moore says, into the system and get somebody in office who wouldn't be competent to handle a real crisis if it happens. And so this is really dangerous politically for the country, and it's dangerous personally. I mean, anyone, when you become outspoken for your views and we become critical of other people, and a lot of times the criticism is totally valid of other people, particularly the criticism of the far left, and of the speech codes and the trigger warnings and the safe spaces, and some of the violence on the left, and on the campuses, when Milo speaks, or Ferguson, the rioting, after some of the incidents involving police profiling and so forth. When you see this kind of thing, this is very much the politics of people who have been left out and who don't care if they blow the system up. It's happened before, and I guess what happened in the early 20th century, people living in Russia had living in comfortable estates, had their estates run over, by the Bolsheviks. I don't remember the heat but wasn't stuff expropriated from people and just taken away by force, by revolution? You can be setting this up again. Now the danger is more terrorism. You have men who join, like ISIS, or join the Islamic State, which is something that is now back down. You have men joining revolutionary causes in order to feel that they belong someplace, and very fooled by the ideology, and then not having any grasp of what they're getting into until they get over there. Some of them regret it, come back, and some of them go to jail, and many of them die. You have this nihilism, and I can understand how nihilism can happen if you feel that things are being expected of you that aren't rational, that aren't fair, and that you're being marginalized. You can decide that this world doesn't mean anything, and so why not attack? I can understand how somebody can think that way, or how somebody can play existential games or something. I didn't, but I was far enough in my thinking in the 60s, in these bad periods of the psychiatric stuff, that I could have thought that way, even though I didn't. I understand it's scary how some people have gone down this path, and from some of the mass shootings and so forth that have happened. By the way, I do not own a gun. I'll just say that right now. I don't own any weapons, but I do understand a little bit what drives some people who do. So when you become visible and you don't put your own skin in the game, you become visible and you talk about something. Well, why? People will come back and say, well, why is this your business? Why don't you take care of me? Why are you talking about immigration? Well, why don't you take care of me then? And you get this kind of reaction, like in social media, and some of this stuff that's very silly. And obviously you can't take care of them directly. The whole question, the refugee crisis, of course, that there was a big debate a few years ago about how many refugees we should take. And of course, Europe has had a huge issue, and there is a Trojan horse problem. In the United States, there probably isn't much of one, but that Trump, of course, had tried to put in all the travel bans and everything. But with the refugees normally are very carefully screened before they come over here. The bigger problem is asylum seekers, people who are already over here and perhaps overstay their visas, or for various reasons that are afraid to return to their home countries, which can be that they're GLBTQ, and ask for asylum. In many cases, they're not eligible for benefits.